I'm Dr. John Gartner.
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
And welcome to another session of Shrinking Trump.
This is our 51st show, John. We've been doing this a long time. And if you haven't watched us before, John and I are both clinical psychologists. We're experts in personality disorders and dementia and other issues that we have found to be problematic, to say the least, for our current president. And we started this show during the campaign, trying to warn the media, political elites, and the public about what we saw as Trump's looming deficits in cognition and his long-established severe narcissistic personality disorder, something known as malignant narcissism. And since he's been president, and since he's just passed the 100-day mark last week, we have seen him wreak havoc in every aspect of governance, in every institution across the board, part of the blitzkrieg flooding the zone. And this week is just another week in this terrible march toward destructive behavior. Yeah. What I fear is going to be a crash in our economy. Right, John?
Yeah, and you've neglected to mention all the havoc he's wreaking in international relations and global the global economy. So he's really sort of taking a wrecking ball to really everything. And what also makes it also, again, to me, so shocking is he's doing all this damage while he is clearly mentally deteriorating in front of our eyes. You know, this is now like the emperor's new clothes. That people are just acting as if, right, these things didn't happen, as if he didn't confuse Harlem and Harvard. You know, we're just going to kind of pretend we didn't see that. Okay. But
and if you want to know more about that, watch last week's show. You can find it right
there. There was if you're not familiar with the context, a reporter asked him about a question about Harvard, and he went on a long spiel about Harlem, but then we'll use the weave to get back to Harvard. And it turns out the people in Harlem were actually protesting for the people in Harvard, I think. Anyway, it made no sense. It was a mishmash, and it's disordered thought. Okay, we're really seeing the breakdown of his capacity to think. And, you know, we warned you and we predicted, right, that everyone said, but if you guys are right, remember when we were before the election, but if you guys are right, then the implications are we could have a president with dementia. And we said, that's right. And they said, but that's terrifying. I said, well, you know what's even more terrifying is dementia is a progressive illness. So he's only going to get worse and worse. And so there's only so much they can do to hide it, but it's starting to ooze out.
But also, which I think is more dangerous, is his severe personality disorder, because that's where the extorting comes in. That's where the destructive wish to kind of destroy everything, to humiliate others. We're going to talk about Trump in the Oval Office with Carney. So if I had to choose between a president with dementia or a president with a severe personality disorder like Trump's, I go with the first one.
Well, the problem is we have both. And I think the interaction is quite frightening. But you're right.
Yes.
His reptilian brain is still functioning very well. You know, it's the cortex. It's the cortex that's going. So he knows how to extort. Right. He has an instinct to dominate and destroy and humiliate. And we're going to see that in this interview with Carney, right, later in the show. How he works all of those muscles, you know, those raptor muscles, you know, his lizard brain still very strong. But, you know, it's when he has to actually kind of make sense of like language and ideas and scenarios. For example, knowing whether they actually happened or whether they happened in a movie, that's where he gets a little confused.
Okay, so, I want to, John, I want to put a spin on something you're saying just for a moment for our audience before we go into the clips and talk about things the way we do, which is I disagree that it's lizard brain. I think his personality is intact. I think he can speak broadly and generally, but when he has to be precise, you start to see him fall apart in his thinking. So it's almost like he can do his old behaviors and has language for it,
Mhm.
But when you start to pin him on things, the lying is out of control, and then he also doesn't make sense when pushed. That's how I would phrase it.
Yeah. So it's the same personality disorder, but with this cognitive fraying around the edges.
Exactly. Bravo. I agree. We're in agreement.
So, like, for example, and a lot of what he does is impulsive, but of course we learned from our guest last week, Dr. Vincent Greenwood, who's an expert on psychopathy, that psychopaths are impulsive, but people with dementia are also impulsive. So now what we have is him kind of acting on his impulses, but in a way that are a little confused. For example, Exhibit A, Escape from Alcatraz, which he is now saying should become a real prison. So out of nowhere, I just want you to visualize this. Out of nowhere, he announces that, you know what? Now, Alcatraz has been a museum for like 40 years. I mean, just it's like announcing that, you know, we're going to take the catacombs and now we're actually going to start like hiding people there again or something. I mean, like it's been transformed now into a public space. Okay, but he's going to turn it back into a prison. Out of nowhere, he announces this, and listen to how he announces it. It's extremely odd because he says now that he's reopening Alcatraz, okay, he's going into the movie business.
How did you decide to reopen Alcatraz? Can you walk us through that decision?
Did I say what?
To reopen Alcatraz, how will you use it? How did you come up with the idea?
Well, I guess I was supposed to be a movie maker. We started with the movie making and we'll end. I mean, it represents something very strong, very powerful in terms of law and order. Our country needs law and order. Alcatraz is, I would say, the ultimate, right? Alcatraz, Sing Sing and Alcatraz, the movies.
So he's going to be reopening it. Look, I guess I'll be getting into the movie business. I'm not sure what he means by that or why he's bringing it up now. But a representative that I do want to highlight, who I think is a very clever voice of resistance, also has that biting Jewish humor, is Representative Moskowitz. I think if I were a congressman, Harry, this is the kind of congressman I would be. But he also solves the mystery. Why now open Alcatraz? And why would that involve being in the movie business?
So, 3 times more expensive than any prison to operate in 1959, Alcatraz was. Okay, it needs about $250 million to shore up the infrastructure and utilities. All food and water has to be barged in, sewage has to be barged out. The facility is almost 100 years old. And so I don't get it. In the days of Doge, where we're cutting budgets, we got to find savings. Now we're going to what? We're going to cut Medicaid and SNAP so that we can pour money into Alcatraz. First of all, have you been to Alcatraz recently? It literally is it's a rust box walking around. You need a tetanus shot just to go into the building. Do we still give tetanus shots, or has RFK gotten rid of those? I can't keep up. And so, listen, where did the president get this idea all of a sudden? Right? Where did he get the idea? Perhaps he was watching Escape from Alcatraz, right? And I brought boards because some people are visual learners. Perhaps he was watching Escape from Alcatraz by Clint Eastwood. Actually, funny part about that, it was actually on television in South Florida. It was on PBS South Florida over the weekend when Trump was at Mar-a-Lago. In fact, he made his announcement just hours after it aired. You know PBS, the programming that he's trying to get rid of, so just in case you're keeping up, right? It's 2 dolls for girls and 0 Elmos, okay?
I love that guy. Are we still doing tetanus shots now with RFK? Is that a thing? But literally 2 hours after the movie showed, you know, he's lolling around there on his sort of lard ass, you know, kind of like, we should bring back Alcatraz. That's what we should do. Okay, so he impulsively makes this decision on the basis of a movie that he saw, not a documentary, right? A fictional movie. But then when he makes the announcement that he's opening the prison, he also announces that he'll be getting into the movie business, I guess. So
he started as a movie. He said he started as a movie maker. It's very confused, isn't it?
So is he a movie maker? Is he making prisons? And here's the point about dementia that I want to make. Why choose? Why choose?
Okay.
You don't have to choose.
You're cracking me up today, John. What can I tell you?
You don't have to choose. That's the great thing, because alternate realities can coexist. He can be Otto Preminger making a movie with Clint Eastwood about Alcatraz. At the same time, he can be tough on crime because he's throwing all those brown people into Alcatraz. It's a way in which thought breaks down. Okay, that is sort of unique to this kind of organic impairment. And these kinds of telltale signs, we just go past them, but we really should be focusing on them.
I agree. And it's something he's done for a while, right? When he said, well, if bleach can kill the virus, why can't we put bleach into people's veins? And that's where John is right. The dementia breaks down boundaries. So if you see a movie, maybe you'll just take the movie and be a movie maker, and then reopen Alcatraz because you're president. You can do anything, right? You can order anything. So if you have a thought, you can make it happen. But there is this kind of reverie, like you're making it sound almost like he's drunk and lolling, But I think of him, he's watching it. Oh, this is a great image. This was a great prison. Wait, we'll just do it. I'll just go. And then an hour later, we're going to reopen Alcatraz because I just thought of it. And I didn't look into it. I mean, it's just incredible. And isn't he doing the same thing with tariffs? I'm really pissed off at, at what the island with the penguins or whatever. I'm just so angry at China this week. Well, if she had called him over the last, 3 months, maybe he wouldn't be so tough on China because he has the thought.
Yeah, he has a thought. And also, just to remind people, this isn't the first time he's confused a movie with reality, because remember when he was saying they're sending all the people from the insane asylums. By the way, anyone seen Silence of the Lambs?
Right.
He goes, yeah, the late, great Hannibal Lecter. They don't like me to talk about him. But, well, first of all, if you say he's late, that implies that he was a living person who died, not a fictional character, right? And he's sort of praising him like, we should, like you say, in some nostalgic way. Again, also sort of revealing his psychopathology, because if you're going to idealize a fictional character who you're then going to imagine is actually real and deceased, why wouldn't you pick someone who was in some way did something to better society or exchange some notoriety doing something other than being a serial person eater?
Like Atticus Finch or something. I mean, there's so many people he could have chosen.
So people that he could have chosen. But, the other thing is, speaking about people he could have chosen, the other really sort of crazy thing that happened this week. And I'm not saying this is the dementia. This is the malignant narcissism. One of the things that Erich Fromm said about malignant narcissists is they become dramatically worse if they gain power. And when they gain power, their grandiosity becomes psychotic. They actually begin to believe that they are gods, like Louis XIV, the sun god. They begin to believe that they are really divine. Okay. So I think there's a very deeply disturbing psychiatric meaning to the picture that we're about to see, okay? Which Trump tweeted this. It's a picture of him dressed as the Pope. In other words, him as Pope. For those of you who are just listening, it's he's in the full Pope regalia on a throne, holding up his finger as if to say, should be signaling something significant. And the important thing is this has been tweeted out on Donald Trump's official account. Let's just, as psychologists for a minute, talk about how disturbing that is and how revealing it is of a level of sort of grandiosity that is very disturbed.
And tremendously insensitive. And it's just funny, like you can't take a joke. But the problem, though, is, of course, the lying. His sociopathy is such he can't even own it. No.
Let's see what he says when he's confronted by a reporter about it.
Some Catholics were not so happy about the image of you looking like the Pope.
Oh, I see. You mean they can't take a joke? You don't mean the Catholics. You mean the fake news media. Not the Catholics loved it. I had nothing to do with it. Somebody made up a picture of me dressed like the Pope, and they put it out on the internet. That's not me that did it. I have no idea where it came from. Maybe it was AI, but I know nothing about it. I just saw it last evening. Actually, my wife thought it was cute. She said, "Isn't that nice?"
My question about
Actually, I would not be able to be married, though. That would be a lot. I'd have to the best of my knowledge, popes aren't big on getting married, are they? Not that we know of. No. I think it's the fake news media that, they're fakers.
My question.
So Donald Trump saying that he had nothing to do with the post, you posted it. It's on your account. I mean, it says Donald Trump. This is being posted from your official account. And then Donald Trump was also saying that people aren't upset and that everybody understands it's a joke and it's just the fake news media. No, I mean, people are really upset about this. The New York State Catholic League put out a statement. Bishops have put out statements. Cardinals have put out statements. People have been, and people in the Catholic community are very upset about this. And whether you're religious or not religious, I think you recognize this is offensive and odd behavior.
And that was Ben Meiselas, by the commentary. I forgot to mention, set that up, that he that he was going to comment on it. I think the thing is there is this grandiosity that says I should be supreme above all other human beings. You know what I mean? So he'll claim any mantle. By the way, there is audio tape also of him being asked, "Who do you think should be pope?" And he said, "Well, actually, I think I'd be a good pope." I'm sorry I didn't include that tape. I realized I should have. So it's not just like he posted it. He also said it. There is a way in which he believes that he should be the divine or the uber alpha over the entire planet. And obviously people were offended. Obviously that's a crazy idea, but not everybody thought it was a crazy idea. Lindsey Graham, and by the way, I checked to make sure this really came from his real account. We have been fooled sometimes by posts that are doctored. But here, Lindsey Graham, this is from his official account. "Seeing is believing. A picture is worth 1,000 words." He's retweeting the picture of Trump as Pope. "Glad to report there is very positive reception and strong momentum for President Trump to be the next Pope. But I will be the first to admit there has been some resistance. Must keep your head down and plow forward. Can't let the naysayers win the day. The next week is crucial as the papal conclave convenes. More updates to come." This makes me think, hey, that, and then if him, anybody could be Pope then, right? I mean, why not? Why not me? Well, actually the conclave just decided a few hours ago. We're taping this on Thursday, but I was thinking about throwing my hat into the ring. What do you think? If not me, why not me? Why not me, Harry?
Because you're Jewish?
All right. Well, maybe it's time someone breaks that cathedral ceiling.
Okay. Why do you want to be? Why do you want to be Pope, John?
Well, it's like a joke my father used to tell. There's this Jewish boy and this Catholic boy, and they're talking, and the Jewish boy says, "Well, we have rabbis. What do you have?" And when you go to your house of worship, and then he says, "Well, we have priests." He goes, "And what's above a priest?" "Well, above a priest is a bishop." "Well, and who does he work for?" "Well, above him is the cardinal." He goes, "And is that the top job?" "Well, no, the top job is the Pope." And he goes, "Okay, so that's the highest you can go. That's the best you can do." And then the Catholic boy goes, "Well, what do you want? The only thing above the Pope is Jesus Christ." And the Jewish boy sits back and smiles and says, "Well, one of our boys made it." But Harry, it's not enough to be the holiest person on the planet. Okay. Another important tweet has come from Donald Trump's account.
Okay. What is it?
It's a picture of him, for those of you who are just listening, like uber. Again, it's one of these fantasy idealizations. And actually, this is even more disturbing because this is actually from the White House account. So not just from even his personal account, but from the White House account. Okay. And let's see, what does it say? "Happy May the 4th, including the radical left lunatics who are fighting so hard to bring the Sith Lord murderers. That's why he's got a lightsaber, because you see he's defending us against the evil Democrats who are helping the Sith Lords, who, if you know Star Wars, are the enemy. Drug lords, dangerous prisoners, and well-known MSN-13 gang members back into our galaxy. You're not the rebellion, you're the Empire. May the Fourth be with you. But here's just something a little bit ironic. The color of his lightsaber is the color of the Sith lightsaber. So in other words, we do know who the real Sith is. I've said in some ways, I think he really is the, like the Emperor. And then he's got these like Darth Vaders who actually, do the fighting for him and the thinking for him. But in other words, just these crazy idealizations are now becoming official. Okay. This is what happens in countries like North Korea. Okay. You see 100-foot idealized images of the great leader, being powerful, loving children, just all of these images that are like too good to be true. They're not even real pictures. They're idealized images. And that's what they're starting to condition us, right?
Well, Trump has been doing that but Trump has been doing that with his trading cards for the past year or so.
That's right.
It
was obscene then, and now it's coming out of the White House. You see, that's what you're right. That's the progression. And before you know it, these things are going to start showing up in official places.
I know.
So, but Harry, we have to be honest with ourselves. We've been warning the public for over a year now about Trump's mental illness, but as psychologists, we know we have to examine our own countertransference. Is it possible that we have a disorder, that maybe we suffer from Trump derangement syndrome? Apparently, that's now actually been proposed as an official diagnosis in the state of Wisconsin. Minnesota Republicans' bill to define Trump derangement syndrome as a mental illness provokes backlash. A bill that was introduced by Minnesota Senate Republicans to define so-called Trump derangement syndrome as a mental illness has provoked a backlash, with some saying the bill trivializes mental health care in the state, regardless of the seriousness of its original intent. The bill, authored by Minnesota Senators Eric Lucero, Steve Drazkowski, Nathan Westernberg, a bunch of people, called for Trump derangement syndrome to be added to the list of definitions related to mental health care in Minnesota. The bill's author defined, in the bill's wording, the syndrome as, quote, the acute onset of paranoia in otherwise normal persons that is in reaction to the policies and presidencies of President Donald J. Trump, and go on, end quote, and go further to argue that it, quote, produces an inability to distinguish between legitimate policy differences and signs of psychic pathology in President Donald J. Trump. So they're making a disorder about thinking Trump has a disorder.
Well, it's too cute by half, and as if legislatures ever establish mental health criteria. And I mean, come on, it's no, too cute. And Wisconsin is the Republican Party is completely a mess in that state. They're on the run. This is just stupid.
It's just stupid, and I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried that you and I are going to be involuntarily committed, diagnosed with Trump derangement syndrome. But I would just like to remind people that in the Soviet Union, that is what happened. That psychiatrists participated, probably coerced by the state, that dissidents were psychiatrically hospitalized and diagnosed as being mentally ill because, they didn't like the policies of the dictator. So that's a real misuse of psychiatry. So I just
that was no, it was done in China too, John. It wasn't just the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is what people do. They put people in psychiatric hospitals and call them deranged, which is, of course, what Trump calls, people who prosecuted him as deranged. Mm-hmm. It's the same impulse.
Right. That's a good point. Right. It's the same impulse. All right. Well, you wanted to talk about Trump's encounter with Prime Minister Carney.
I did. Those of you who watch our show regularly know that when Trump invites a foreign leader into the Oval Office, he usually meets with them, has a couple of statements with them, and then he likes to have the press ask questions. You know, the one thing about Trump, which is sort of unlike other dictators, is that he loves attention so much that he always has the press asking him questions. He's not hard to reach. He does interviews all the time. And he's gotten to this habit of bringing in the press for like half an hour or an hour. We saw it with Macron earlier this year. We saw it in that disastrous meeting with Zelensky. And now we see the same thing with John Carney of Canada. And the liberal press, the progressive press tends to show the clips of Trump being difficult or crazy or yelling at someone like he did with Zelensky. But I watch these things very carefully, and they're very interesting to watch them unfold. For example, he got along with Zelensky for about 90% of that Oval Office visit. He was baited. Zelensky was baited by J.D. Vance, and then Trump attacked him. But that wasn't planned. And so this thing with Carney, the more I watch these things, the more I'm starting to understand Trump in a different way. So I thought I would begin with the very beginning of the Oval Office press opportunity with Carney.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's a great honor to have Prime Minister Mark Carney with us. As you know, just a few days ago, he won a very big election in Canada. And I think I was probably the greatest thing that happened to him, but I can't take full credit. His party was losing by a lot, and he ended up winning. So I really want to congratulate him. It was probably one of the greatest comebacks in the history of politics, maybe even greater than mine. You know? But I want to just congratulate you. That was a great election, actually. We were watching it with interest, and I think Canada chose a very talented person, a very good person, because we spoke before the election quite a few times. And it's an honor to have you at the White House and the Oval Office. And you see the new and improved Oval Office as it becomes more and more beautiful with love. You know, we handle it with great love and 24-karat gold. That always helps too. Right? But it's been a lot of fun. We're going over some of the beautiful pictures that were stored in the vaults that were for many, many years, in some cases over 100 years. They were stored in vaults of the great presidents, or almost great presidents, all having a reason for being up, every one of them. So it's very interesting. But I just want to congratulate you, and ran a really great race. I watched the debate. I thought you were excellent, and I think we have a lot of things in common. We have some tough points to go over, and that'll be fine.
All right. I think this is fascinating. One thing that Jonathan Martin said, which I think is exactly right, is that when Trump meets someone, he wants to charm them immediately. He wants to win them over, but he can't help also being hostile, right? So, for example, it's Mark Carney. So Carney, he says to Carney, "You did great in the debate." Well, in the debate, Carney was putting down Trump, saying that he would fight Trump as the Canadian Prime Minister, for example. He decides that they chose a good person. You did a really good race.
He said more than that. He said it was because of him. He said that he delivered the win for Carney. That's the thing. In other words, it's still all his power. He delivered. He said, "You won because of me." Because they hate him. In other words, the anti-Trump vote pushed the liberal into victory. He said, and you were behind by a lot. Now he's right. Because you were nothing. I made you from nothing. You were losing by a lot. That was one of the biggest comebacks in history, maybe the biggest comeback in history. It was all because of me. I made you.
Well,
that's what
he is, and I was going to get to that, but I was just trying to point out that the way that he pronounces that someone is great is actually, we watch you with interest. You did a great job. They chose a good person. Like, I've now put my imprimatur on you. So it's charming, but you're right, John. It's got that underlying thing, which is it all comes down to me. I made you.
Also, psychopaths can be charming. I'm thinking about those gangster movies, like, there's the low level gangster, as soon as he shows up, he's intimidating, right? And then you get to the top boss, and he's a refined man, in a mansion, and he speaks in a very educated way and seems to be forming a rapport with our protagonist, right? But actually, he's in a whole heck of a lot of trouble. And the thing is, right? And so he's being charming with Carney. I would agree. I know people, by the way, people hate it. They hate it when you say Trump is charming. They put angry comments in the live stream. Okay. They just cannot stand it, but you are not wrong. Stay strong.
And when I say, when I say he's charming, I'm not saying I like him. I'm saying he's effective. Right. And he does charm people, and people describe that. And I think you could see Carney being disarmed by Trump in those first 2 minutes. And surprise, folks, you probably don't know this, but the night before, Trump just bashed him and Canada in a long Truth Social post. Yeah. So he kind of beat him up before he showed up, and then it's like, hey, nice to meet you. He did the same thing with Bill Maher. This is, and
but
Bill
again,
Maher
it's the dominance and submission paradigm, right? In other words, you're going to come to me on your knees. You're going to come to me. I'm going to fling shit on you. Like, it's like a baboon. I'm going to fling shit on you. And then when you come here to speak to me, you'll still have the shit dripping from your face.
Okay. I hear you, but when you go for lizard brain and bam, a monkey, I think it's a little more subtle than that. What it is I'm going to savage you in the press before you show up, and you're going to come in off balance, preparing to be shat on, to be, and then I'm going to say, hey, welcome. You're a great man. I appreciate your victory. I was following this with real interest. I think he had a great comeback. I mean, it was because of me, but so you put someone off balance, and then you treat them like you're their friend, at least for a while. And that's where the sociopaths bait and switch. I'm acting like we're close, but then I'm going to turn on you. He did the same thing to Zelensky, right? It's exactly what happened. So I want to show you, if we go 8 minutes into this thing, reporter asks about Trump's, insistence that Canada become a 51st state. And Trump soft pedals it, to be fair. He says, well, we're not going to talk about that today. And it takes two to tango. So he's stepping back from the notion that he was going to send troops over the border to take Canada. So he's being conciliatory but threatening. And then you can see what Carney does.
Takes two to tango, right? But no, I do. I mean, I believe it would be a massive tax cut for the Canadian citizens. You get free military, you get tremendous medical cares and other things. There would be a lot of advantages, but it would be a massive tax cut. And it's also a beautiful, as a real estate developer, I'm a real estate developer at heart. When you get rid of that artificially drawn line, somebody drew that line many years ago with like a ruler, just a straight line right across the top of the country. When you look at that beautiful formation when it's together, I'm a very artistic person, but when I looked at that beauty, I said that's the way it was meant to be. But I do feel it's much better for Canada, but we're not going to be discussing that unless somebody wants to discuss it. I think that there are tremendous benefits to the Canadian citizens, tremendously lower taxes, free military, which honestly we give you essentially anyway because we're protecting Canada if you ever had a problem. But I think it would really be a wonderful marriage because it's two places that get along very well. They like each other a lot.
Well, if I may, as you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. But the opportunity is in the partnership and what we can build together.
Well, can I refer back to the baboons?
Please, go ahead.
Because first of all, Carney is looking incredibly uncomfortable because Trump is going on and on And you're right. He's answering the reporter's question, but really he's pounding Carney. Right?
Absolutely, yes.
Pounding him. Your taxes would be lower. We're protecting you anyway, blah, blah, blah. And then he reaches over and touches him and says, but you know that anyway. We're taking care of you anyway. So that gesture was one of dominance over him. So, he does, manage to say we're not for sale. But this is you see very clearly how he is exerting dominance over him in this very simian way.
Of course, John, I'm only, the only reason why I'm objecting to simian and lizard is because there's something very human and complex about what he's doing. It's not so simple. He's stroking him and hitting him at the same time. He's threatening him and cajoling him. It would be a great marriage between two people. Like, and then this whole thing, I'm an artistic person, really?
Yeah, right.
And when you look at the landmass, I guess, when you look at the Alps and France and Italy, there shouldn't be that line there either. I mean, the whole thing makes no sense. Right. So he's putting pressure on him, but he's doing it with flattery. He's doing it with a warm tone. And but it gets worse a half an hour later, 20 minutes later. So this is at the end of the thing. And I've been watching these things. It frays after a while, Frays, right? It gets, the aggression starts to emerge even more directly
I think
at the end of the meetings.
Yeah, if this is the tape that I think it is, and I think it is, he really comes down on him, sort of like Zelensky at the end, very powerfully. Very powerful.
Exactly. And that's what in fact, he even refers to it, to the Zelensky event. So let's take a look at this one.
Sure, I would. But this is not necessarily a one-day deal. This is over a period of time they have to make that decision. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may. Respectfully, Canadians' view on this is not going to change on the 51st day. Secondly, we are the largest client of the United States in the totality of all the goods. So we are the largest client of the United States. We have a tremendous auto sector between the two of us, and the changes that made have been helpful. 50% of a car that comes from Canada is American. That's not like anywhere else in the world. And to your question about is there one thing? No, this is a bigger discussion. There are much bigger forces involved, and this will take some time and some discussions, and that's why we're here, to have those discussions, and that is represented by who's sitting around the table.
See, the conflict is, and this is very friendly. We're not. This is not going to be like we had another little blow up with somebody else. That was a much different. This is a very friendly conversation, but we want to make our own cars. We don't really want cars from Canada, and we put tariffs on cars from Canada, and at a certain point, it won't make economic sense for Canada to build those cars. And we don't want steel from Canada because we're making our own steel, and we're having massive steel plants being built right now as we speak. We really don't want Canadian steel, and we don't want Canadian aluminum and various other things because we want to be able to do it ourselves. And we, because of past thinking of people, we have a tremendous deficit with Canada. In other words, they have a surplus with us. And there's no reason for us to be subsidizing Canada. Canada's a place that will have to be able to take care of itself economically.
Look at that. There it is.
There it is. There's the hammer blow.
And it comes after Carney. No, it comes after Carney says, we're your biggest customer.
Right. Right.
You need us. You are not as strong as you say you are. And Trump's pushback is, we don't need you at all. We don't want your cars. We don't want your steel. Like they're building steel plants right now. Right. They're not.
That's what's so crazy about this. No, what's so crazy about this is that so Trump, I think Trump's model is that we should bring manufacturing back home, like it was 100 years ago. But what he's doing is just shutting off all of the arteries of trade, right? With the sense that we're building our own factories. We don't need those cheap Chinese toys. We don't need your cars, your aluminum, your steel. Yes, we do.
Yes, we
Yes,
do.
we do. We do
We
need
do.
them. We need them. Stop saying we don't need them. Stop preventing China from, I didn't have time to do it today because we're trying to make the show shorter because people have been begging us to. But but the container ships aren't even stopping at the ports of Los Angeles and Portland, and they're not. The ships from China are coming home empty. Okay, and never mind 100% tariff. They're not. There's nothing there to buy at any price. Okay, and then we're telling Canada, we don't want your raw materials, we don't want your manufacturing, we don't want any of that. Well, actually, one of my favorite people now is starting to be Doug Ford, the Canadian politician. Here's what he has to say about that.
President Trump's tariffs, this guy drives me nuts. I just get wound up. He's sitting there, he drives it. Here I go off my speech. My team starts getting nervous when I go off the teleprompter. And by the way, I'll tell you one thing. We all have tough jobs, right? We all have tough jobs. The person with the toughest job in this room is a teleprompter operator, because I'm all over the place right now. She's going up and down. And anyways, what drives me nuts, you see this guy on TV. We don't need Canada. Really? I guess you don't need our high-grade nickel that they use 57% of their nickel to build their military, their aerospace, and manufacturing. Imagine if we never gave them our high-grade nickel. Or my friend Scott Moe out in Saskatchewan, if he cut off the potash, that 87% of the farmers down in the U.S. use Saskatchewan potash. Or the uranium coming from Saskatchewan as well. And you just think of this, uranium gets refined in Port Hope, in your area, David, and then gets shipped down to the U.S. And imagine if they didn't have the uranium. They wouldn't have any nuclear power down there. Or, of course, what would they do if they didn't have our electricity? The 1.5 million homes and businesses in New York and Minnesota and Michigan, they wouldn't have any power. And I talked to all these governors, no matter if it's Republican or Democrat. And even the Republicans, behind closed doors, because they're terrified of their leader, that's pretty crazy in itself, that totally disagree with attacking their closest friends and allies. We always believe in something called the AMCAN Fortress, the American-Canadian Fortress. We put a ring around it. We'd be unstoppable anywhere in the entire world. We'd be the wealthiest, richest two nations in the world and the safest two nations. And, all he's trying to do, and we wish him, I forget about political stripes, by the way. We have a prime minister down there, and he's going to be sitting down, and he's going to give it everything he can. This is a time to unite the country, not people saying, oh, I'm leaving the country, or I'm doing this, I'm doing that. United we stand, divided we fall. And we have to be united Canada together to fight President Trump's tariff.
Wow. I think what's ironic about that, of course, is the person who said, united we stand, divided we fall, was Abraham Lincoln, talking about America. So we're divided and we're falling. But the good news is we're really uniting Canada. We're really bringing them together. There's nothing like a common enemy to bring a people together.
I'm glad some good is coming of this.
Exactly.
That performance in the Oval Office, and I want to propose, since I've been analyzing these. It's my third Oval Office analysis, which is. I'm starting to think that Trump is extremely comfortable in the Oval Office. He's more relaxed. He's more charming, if you will. He's also just as despicable as he is in his intentions, but he's not anxious. I've never seen him anxious in the Oval Office. Now, check out this part of the interview on Meet the Press with Kristen Welker. And I took this from the larger, they actually released the whole hour interview, which I sat through, always difficult, but I do it. But I'm really giving you this clip, not for political reasons, but for psychological reasons. Let's take a look at it.
Last month, you directed your Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to review 2 people who you perceived to be your political adversaries. And yet you told me in December that you would not direct the Justice Department to investigate your political foes. What changed?
Well, no, I just look at people, and I'm not directing anybody. They looked at these 2 people. They might have known it, or they might have heard it from 2 years ago. One person said, he knew me so well. He was, I think, on CNN or MSDNC, but they're both failing networks. You're happy to know, even though one of them, I guess, is related to you in one form or another, although they're trying to cut him loose as fast as possible. But it was well known that this one person, it was almost like he was my brother. I don't even know who he is. Maybe he was there. Maybe he was in the Oval Office a few times as a surrogate for, somebody in some form of government, along with 25 other people that sat in the back of the room or stood in the back of a room. I have no idea who this guy is. And he's out there. And then he did a book called Anonymous. I think that's really subversion. I think it's spying. It's something really bad.
But you passed an executive order calling for your Attorney General to investigate that.
For a long time. And the other one said that the election was so wonderful. It was it turned out it wasn't a wonderful election. It was a corrupt election.
Let me ask it this way, sir, because when we talked in December, I asked you, what is your message to people who didn't vote for you? Let me remind you of what you said. You said, I love you, and we're going to all work together. How does pursuing your political foes help to unify?
Did I really say I love you?
You really did. That's a direct quote.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right, but I'd like to see.
I promise I'll show it to you. I'll show you the tape.
Look.
How does that help to unify the country?
I want to treat people fairly, whether they voted for me or not. I want to have a unified country. It's very hard because the media is so fake, including, like, even the way you ask questions. Every question is asked in a negative vein. There's a toy company that took a toddler's, whatever. But you don't talk about the fact that gasoline is down at numbers that nobody believes possible. You know why they're down, by the way? Drill, baby, drill. We're drilling like crazy right now.
We try to make sure every question is fair, Mr. President.
Look, every question you ask says a very negative slant.
No, but look, I'm just curious.
And I'm fine for responding to you. I don't think you're very difficult at all to respond to be honest with you. But you know what? You should ask some positive things like, sir, it's amazing what you've done with gasoline. Because you know what? Gasoline's big business.
All right. So I just want to make a few points. First of all, look at his posture.
Yeah, he's hunched over.
He's not standing up. Why is my camera doing that? He's hunched over. I think he seems anxious. He's whining. He's here asking me nasty questions, and then he gives her a question, a sir question that we used to call them. Sir, what about gasoline prices? You've done such a great job.
Right.
He's whining and asking her to treat him better. Right. His answer on gas is ridiculous. Has nothing to do with drill, baby, drill. It just so happens that OPEC is producing more gas right now. That's their response to the worldwide trade embargo. They're producing more. But it's not down that low anyway. I mean, the whole thing is nonsense. But I'm thinking, what a contrast between him in the Oval Office.
Yes.
Being in this network interview. It's totally different. And
because in the Oval Office, everyone's fluffing him, right? I mean, he's basically just being adored and cajoled, and everybody's laughing at his jokes, right? And ignoring his dementia, just saying, yes, yes, sir, you're in the movies. It's a great honor to be in the movies with you, business with you. Sure, why not?
But at the beginning of this interview, when she says, "Why are you investigating?" It's Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs, I think his name is.
Yes.
Taylor had written that book, Anonymous. He was an insider in the White House.
Yeah.
And had published stuff. And I understand Trump's rage at him. He, the guy did, spill the beans about how crazy things were there. But that's no reason to sick the Justice Department on him. And Chris Krebs, who was his election security person, had come out and said this was a very secure election. And Trump saying, well, it's got to be something. It's got to be spying or something. I mean, you can see him flailing. You've got to punish these people.
Yeah, and also, he says that, well, I didn't tell the Justice Department to do it. They saw it on their own. What do you tell me? He literally issued an executive order naming these people by name and saying they should be investigated by the Justice Department. Kristen Welker brings that up, but it might have been worth taking a breath and taking that in. Sir, you issued an executive order against these two individuals. That's very unusual. What justifies that? And actually, the Chris Krebs thing, it's really pretty clear. It's not enough that you have to be a part of the conspiracy. Okay, and if Chris Krebs was actually protected the election, he was actually in charge of cybersecurity for the election. So he did his job, which was to protect the election, and then he announced that it was successful. Because Trump is saying the election was stolen, anyone who says the election wasn't stolen, in other words, now if you contradict the big lie, that becomes a crime.
That's a crime.
Right.
Right. And that's where we see democratic institutions and protections begin to be unraveled from the top.
Exactly. And there's another thing in that interview that shows that as well that I want to go to in 1 second. But I just want to point out one other thing about this interview that I find so psychologically interesting. She says, well, you said that if you were elected, you love all the people and you love the people and that you would, unite them. He says, I said that. No, yes, you did, sir. I guess you're right, but I said that. I said I love them. He's such a hateful figure that that it actually disturbs him that they're quoting him as saying he had love for the American people. He wants to, he wants to fact check that.
Well, he's afraid it makes him look weak. I think when he's feeling good the way he was with Carney in the Oval Office, he feels comfortable slapping him and pushing his face down because Carney dared to say Canada's important. But when he's anxious, he's more afraid of looking bad. And so she just quoted him as saying, "I love you. I want everyone to vote for me to be happy." And he goes, "What I didn't say? Did I say that?"
Well, so in other words, if he feels that having love for the American people would make him weak, that's a little disturbing in and of itself. I mean, we're trying to understand the psychology, right, of the malignant narcissist. They're not like you and I. To them, love is a dirty word, but they love the smell of napalm in the morning. They love destruction, right? They don't like libidinal connection and love.
Look,
except with their admirers, except with their throng of sycophants.
Look, all of this is bad. Like all of it is screwed up. But the emphasis on the fear of looking weak. When he's anxious in an interview, he says, "You're not hard to answer." He's putting her down for not being tough on him, even though he's complaining that she's being tough on him. Do you see how that works?
Yeah.
It's he's in a trap, man. He's in a trap around the fear of looking weak. He can't get out of it. He can't. And he looks terrible in that interview.
He does look terrible. Physically, he looks terrible. And this is what I mean about the deterioration. He is deteriorating. Some would say not fast enough. The part of the clip from this interview that you showed that has been shown a lot on social media, but I want to show it again. This is where Donald Trump is denying that he has any knowledge that it is actually his job to defend the Constitution.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, the Fifth Amendment says
I don't know. It seems it might say that, but if you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials. We have thousands of people that are some murderers and some drug dealers and some of the worst people on earth. Some of the worst, most dangerous people on earth. And I was elected to get them the hell out of here, and the courts are holding me from doing it.
But even given those numbers that you're talking about, don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me.
He doesn't know if he's supposed to act according to the Constitution. He'd have to speak to one of his lawyers about that.
One of his brilliant lawyers, because it's his job to be strong. And if following the Constitution means that I'm weak, I'm not going to do it.
Right. And actually, he had already thrown out the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, by saying that people weren't entitled to due process. We'd have to have 100, 1 million, 2 million trials. We don't have time for that. So we just send people to the bowels of hell with no due process. We don't have time for trials. And then she said, well, isn't that according to the Constitution? Oh, Constitution, schmonstitution,
Man, it's I don't know. I mean, I'm here to take care of getting rid of these people.
Right.
Identify with my rage and my power. Don't think about protections. Who needs protection?
Right. And what's sad, Harry, is that so we're, as I repeatedly remind people, old. Okay, but that means we have a history with America, right? Being a constitutional republic. Okay, what's scary is that we have people growing up now, right, who might not really understand how dramatic a statement it is for the president to go follow the Constitution. I don't know. I'll have to talk to my lawyer, lefty Louie, and my brilliant lawyer, see if there's some way to get around that. So
lefty Louie.
I don't know. Right? Make him some cheap sounding, low grade lawyer. And Harry, we have a very special guest today, Representative Chrissie Houlahan. We actually probably should have said that at the top of the show to keep people watching. But you wanted to set this up because actually we showed a clip of her a few weeks ago, and you found it so inspiring that you reached out to her office, and they agreed to come on Shrinking Trump.
Yeah, it was 5 weeks ago, actually. It was when Congress began to investigate the SignalGate scandal. That was when, if you remember, Pete Hegseth and Mike Waltz had included Jeffrey Goldberg on a group chat, and then Hegseth had dropped attack plans onto them in this unsecured chat, and I was still in Paris at the time, and because of the time difference, it was in the evening. It's later than it is here. I was able to watch the hearings for a couple of hours, and this congresswoman comes on named Chrissie Houlahan from the 6th District of Pennsylvania, and she spoke with such authenticity and honesty. She had been in the military, in the Air Force. She'd actually lived her life as the child of military people. She confronted Tulsi Gabbard in a way that was, I think, devastating, but not. It wasn't sadistic. It wasn't a show of muscle. It was just saying, how can you sit here and allow this kind of danger to be to go past you without investigating or stopping it? So I thought she was so extraordinary that John encouraged me, and I reached out to her office and back and forth. And this week we were able to get an interview with her, and we're really thrilled about it. But before we speak to her, let's just show you that clip from the hearings.
Thank you for the time. And I struggle. And if you look at my notes, I've changed my mind about 1 million times what I'd like to talk about. I'd like to first start with Director Radcliffe. I find it offensive for you to accuse me as a Democrat of not caring about national threats. I very much wanted to talk about those, in fact, had prepared questions in advance of this hearing about those threats, specifically about biosecurity and bioterrorism, but I don't have time to ask those questions because the threat is in the House. The threat is across the dais, and I need to ask these questions. It's my job to ask these questions of you. Because when I served in the military and I served in classified environments, had this happened to me, I would have walked my resignation in immediately. This is not okay. Communicating these sorts of things in Signal is not okay. Targets, times, those kinds of things are absolutely classified, and we all know it. I know it, These people know it, you all know it. And the fact that we're having to have these conversations now means that I can't ask the questions that I need to ask about things like bioterrorism and biosecurity. And so I'd like to put you in check as well, sir, because you can't assume who I am any more than I can assume who you are, sir. I would like to move my questions, however, over to Director Gabbard, because you are the DNI. You do have an obligation and a responsibility. I'm going to speak to you specifically about the fact that you have spent much of your 40 days talking about the importance of making sure that we don't reveal classified information, making sure that we don't leak information. You're a former battalion commander in the Army. I don't think that you would have necessarily appreciated the kind of leaking of information that I believe absolutely did happen in this Signal channel and is worthy of a further investigation. In fact, this committee established something called 50 U.S.C. 3235A, and this committee, on a bipartisan, apartisan basis, requires you, the DNI, to swiftly notify Congress and the Intelligence Committee if you're aware of any sort of significant unauthorized disclosure or compromise of classified information, which I would argue this has all of the markings of being that. And so if you, as the DNI, see such a thing anywhere within your organization's purview, you have the obligation to begin an investigation to report back to us on that. Would this seem to qualify to you as something worthy of that investigation?
Thank you for your question, Congresswoman. In this situation, Secretary Hegseth has the classification and declassification authority over DOD information.
This chat did not have the auspice of being a DOD chat. There's no such thing as labeling it as DOD. This was a chat amongst a great variety of people, and you, according to our law that we passed here bipartisanly, have an obligation when you think there has been a tangible, significant leak of information to instigate an investigation. Do you not think it's important to do such a thing?
Well, the National Security Council is investigating this inadvertent leak. And again, I point to Secretary Hegseth as having the classification.
I would argue that Secretary Hegseth, if he had the dignity that he needs to have, should be walking his resignation in, because I believe that his probably is heading toward being relieved of his duty based on what I think are significant and illegal leaks, most likely. I would like it if you would please commit to this organization that you will follow the law, and I would like it if you would also investigate what is likely to be more than just this chat. Because if there's one, there's more than one. If there's smoke, there's fire. Would you please obligate yourself and your organization to that investigation?
Yeah, Congresswoman, yes, I will follow the law.
I think that's just a masterful set of questioning. She really was so clear and compelling. And I think she really got Tulsi Gabbard to stop. And John, did you have something to say about that?
Well, I think she's, we've said that Democrats have so little power. I think she's really using the power of the hearings and her voice and her knowledge of understanding how national security works to basically say, it's your legal obligation to initiate an investigation into an intelligence breach like this. Will you follow the law? I think that she's trying to shame and report back to Congress. I think she's trying to get the system to work in a functional way. Whether that's possible with these corrupt actors is another question.
Yes. Well, before we show the interview, just to give you her background, actually, she has a great story. Her father was rescued at the end of World War II from the Holocaust with his mother from Ukraine. And her father then grew up and married someone in the States, and they were in the military. And so she grew up on different bases. She went to Stanford, where she got a degree in engineering, then went to MIT, where she got more training in policy. And I forget what the other things were for MIT. And then, as we talk about in the interview, she went back to the University of Pennsylvania and did Teach for America, because she was fascinated and thought it was important to look at the education of girls and young women in science. So she is someone who, and then she was in the military herself, also in business, and then 7 years ago ran for Congress, where she has been, I think a very serious and well-respected member of the House. And so, without further ado, here's our interview with Chrissie Houlahan. Well, welcome to the show. We're so glad to have you. We were so amazed by your the questioning you did of Tulsi Gabbard, and how clear and precise you were. And the one thing that struck us was that you suggested there had to be more, and you were quite prescient.
Well, I think that it would be unusual if there hadn't been more, and my guess is that there are still more to come. I think that knowing a little bit as I do about how we communicate in places like Congress and in places like the national security environment that we're talking about, there are inevitably chats going on of all forms. And importantly, Signal is a way that people communicate. It's just not a way that people communicate classified information. And so if they were sloppy enough and careless enough to have shared this kind of information at that level, you can guarantee that there were more similar kinds of conversations happening around them. And also with as much concern as what's happening, I hate the word below, but below them as well. When you set a culture that says it's okay to speak in these ways about these things with such callousness, you can inevitably expect that it will permeate the organization as well. And so that also worries me, kind of making people aware of just how dangerous it is to share this kind of information at this level.
You know, you recently took a stand of blocking the increase in defense spending unless they get rid of Hegseth, which I thought was a very principled stand. Maybe you could say more about that.
Sure. You know, I grew up in a military family. I'm third generation military, served myself. I really believe in the power of defense. And I really do believe in hard power and soft power. And of course, I'm devastated to see the erosion of soft power in this administration. And that's very, very scary. That being said, I do still believe that we are in probably one of the most dangerous times in history, and certainly in the last 80 years. And so I could be convinced that we might need a more robust budget for defense. The problem is, first, you have to tell me what you're spending it on. And second, I have to believe in your leadership. And I am effectively the board of directors or part of the board of directors here. And so it's my job to make sure that we're thinking about what our budget looks like, but also more important to my job as part of the board is that I have this sort of fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the leadership of that organization, the DoD in this particular case, can handle what it is that we're sending towards them, or what they're, raising, so to speak. And I just have no faith in Hegseth. He's one of the singularly least qualified people to even be considered for the job, let alone hold the job. And so, in my opinion, until such time as he is no longer leading that organization, it's not even worth entertaining an additional $150 billion worth of defense expenditure.
Well, so I have a tough question, and it's tough in the sense that I know I want you to be able to speak obviously from where you are, but I have to speak from where I am. I am really strongly of the opinion that Donald Trump is a Russian asset. I simply believe that exactly as the word sounds. I believe he and Putin are working systematically on the same team, whatever you want to call that, however you want to describe that relationship. And one of the things that's been disappointing to me is that the Democrats, I feel, have been underwhelming in their confrontation of, okay, what is potentially a national security crisis of a proportion that we can't almost even comprehend, right? And this has been going on really since his first election. And the Democrats didn't open an impeachment inquiry. I was one of those people that was literally chaining myself to my congressman's door, demanding an impeachment inquiry, because an inquiry, not saying an impeachment, but if you suspect that the president might be in league with our mortal enemy, then I think you have a responsibility to look into it. Now you see what he's doing with Ukraine. It does nothing to disprove. In fact, it reinforces that notion. To what extent are we going to confront, explore, whatever word we want to use, but get more deeply into this and not pretend it's not happening, if that makes sense?
Well, you and I are talking to each other because I had some similar concerns about in 2016. I raised my hand to run for Congress, having never run for anything but class secretary, in fifth grade before this, having no intention of ever being a public figure in this way, and being a deeply introverted person. I did this. I ran for Congress because of my deep concern about President Trump 1.0, and because of the fact that I really thought that we were barreling towards a very dangerous administration and a very dangerous time in our security, our national and global security. And so you may recall early into that first term that I served, 7 of us, myself included, wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post, which said, if the allegations against President Trump in blocking aid to Ukraine were true, that this indeed would be impeachable and we should open an investigation. And as you may or may not recall, that was the tipping point when Speaker Pelosi did instigate an investigation in the second impeachment of President Trump. And it's ridiculous that we even have to say the second impeachment of President Trump. And so I am here still because the work still needs to be done to make sure that we are addressing what, hey, if he's a witting agent of Russia, there's one thing to say. If he's unwitting, there's another thing to say. It doesn't really matter in many ways because we're all in the same situation, regardless, which is he is bowing to a very, very dangerous man in Putin, and a very, very dangerous set of ambitions that Putin has, which look remarkably like 1939, for lack of a better way of describing it. And so there are Democrats here, myself being one of them, who are literally here. And my mission is to do the very, very best that I can to help mitigate the damage to the degree that I can, to get rid of people like Secretary Hegseth, who I believe to be part of the problem, to get rid of, we want to talk about Russian assets, Tulsi Gabbard. There are all kinds of things that are very, very alarming that are going on within this administration. And there are many of us here that are here just in fact because of this same concern that you have.
Yeah, I was very impressed that you held Tulsi Gabbard to your law, your law that insists that she investigate any problems in intelligence. Has she followed up on that at all?
This is another part of, what's so mind-blowing, literally mind-blowing about what's going on here, is that you have Tulsi Gabbard, who was a Democratic member of Congress. She was here when I was here, my first term, who is sitting now in this very strange position of DNI, who has said the words that she will follow the law, and at least to her credit said those words, which is different than our commander-in-chief, who said that he wasn't really sure if he had any constitutional obligation, this past weekend. And so, no, to answer your question, I haven't heard anything that would indicate that she is holding to her word to follow the law and to investigate these particular allegations of the misuse of Signal and the continued misuse of Signal. And I believe that there's probably a whole lot more there, not just kind of abuse of this platform, but again, witting, unwitting, I don't know. One of the things that I've been trying to get through here in the body in Congress is that we here in Congress, when we get elected, are instantly given top secret SDI clearances with no background checks and with no training. The kind of first day that you're sworn in, you literally sign a 5x7 card that says that you're accepting your top secret SDI clearance. Something that took me almost 2 years of investigations on me and my husband and my family to be able to get when I was a young lieutenant. And then it is accompanied by exactly no training of how to handle classified information. And so, in addition to what's going on the intel side of things and on the executive branch side of things, I'm also working working aggressively within my own body, within the legislative branch, to say, guys, at a minimum, can we at least learn how to use classified information? And can we at least learn how to talk about it? And that has been impossible. I have been here almost 7 years, and I still haven't gotten anywhere for just mandatory training for freshmen. That's what I'm just starting there, of how to manage classified information.
Incredible. John, do you have another question?
I do. So, one of the things that's very frustrating for Democrats right now is the feeling of powerlessness, right? After this last election, we really don't have many formal levers of power. And I actually think I feel a sense of sympathy for you because I would hate to be a congressperson right now. I think I would hate my job. I would hate coming to work. I would yell at everybody. I'd be angry all the time. I'd be impossible to deal with. Harry can back me up on this. Okay.
He's always a little
And it seems like and then when I hear people criticizing the Democrats, I think I've got a lot of criticisms of what we could have done when we had power to prevent this outcome. But now that we're here, right, and our tools are so limited, I almost feel more sympathetic because we don't have that many tools to use. People think, why don't they do something? Why don't they do something? But what can we do? It seems to me the only thing we have now is the power of our voice. And that's one of the reasons we asked the show, because your voice was so powerful in that hearing. We wanted to really bring attention to it. Is there anything else that Congress people or the Democratic Party can be doing other than speaking out, or maybe speaking out in a different way or more often? So I don't want to rule that out. What do you see as the tools that are available to us now?
Sure. And I agree with you. This is difficult. One of the things I try to communicate to my constituency is, elections do have consequences, and this is where we are. And you're right that there is a certain degree of powerlessness. But what I would say is, just because you don't see me screaming or yelling or tweeting or raging doesn't mean that I'm not using the power that I have. And specific to me, I come from a really purple place. My district is nearly equally divided between Democrat and Republican. Yeah. I come from a Democrat and Republican mom and dad. I really still value the conversations that I have, although they are fewer and farther between, with my Republican colleagues. And I'm still having those conversations. And I feel a little like a Verizon commercial where I'll call, the people that I'm friends with. And when the president does something that's just bananas, I'll say, like, can you hear me now? Like, what do you think now? Are you going to say something now? And I have a relationship that is 7 years in the making now, where I'm trying to communicate in a way that maybe the American people and my constituents don't see, but that doesn't mean that I hope it isn't making a difference. And so that's also something that I don't think we give enough credit to, is that it's not just signs, although those are really, really powerful coming from my community. It's not just phone calls to elected representatives. Everybody has to do everything they can. And so for me, specifically, my lane is what you're talking about: national security, intelligence, the intelligence community, national service. I'm deeply passionate about national service, and we've just blown up AmeriCorps and City Year and Peace Corps and those kinds of things. Yeah. Women in the military, veterans, those are my lane. And if each one of us takes that, a lane and rages in that lane, I hope that we will make a difference.
I just was thinking, when you mentioned all those things, of course, everything that you have accomplished and stood for is being challenged by DOGE and the way that USAID was demolished, and Hegseth's ideas of a new military. And yeah, I can imagine. I had another question for you. It's a little bit less direct, I think. I noticed that in your extraordinary background of engineering, service in the Air Force, policy training, you also went back and did Teach for America. And you just mentioned that you were an introvert, but what a wonderful thing that you did. How do you find your various experiences, particularly teaching? How does that enter into your work as a congressperson?
So it's actually kind of was a formative experience for me in being here in this body now, and let me explain why. I really am passionate about STEM and STEAM education, and as we've talked a little bit about women and girls and communities of color, and just those who are not less likely to be engaged in those really important fields. What I discovered when I entered the classroom in my 40s in Teach for America. So I was teaching chemistry to 11th graders when my daughter was in 10th grade taking chemistry. What I learned is that there's a real, very, very serious profession and rigor to how teachers teach, and how classrooms are managed, literally managed. And that is something that I have taken with me to Congress because it helps me when we're having a town hall, as an example, where we want to create an atmosphere of learning and of interchange and of experience, where we're not screaming at each other and throwing things at each other and, not talking to each other or learning from one another. And so our town halls, and we've held nearly 100 of them in the nearly 7 years that we've been in office, we do. We're very serious about it, our office, an award-winning office for lots of different reasons. But what sort of setting the norms of a classroom, which are not dissimilar than the norms of an office, a meeting or whatever, is an important part of making sure that we have civility and decency and making sure that people feel like that they're not coming and just getting, yelled at. And so that is a huge lesson, that I've learned as a result of being able to teach 11th grade chemistry students.
That's so great. I'm on faculty at Cornell, and every year students of mine do Teach for America. And I remember the first year of City Year, which I think was a wonderful program.
It is.
And to think that they could just be demolished.
Yeah. And my colleagues on the right, most of them have this idea that this is somehow wasteful and a giveaway. When I was doing Teach for America, I was making about $25,000 a year. This was in 2011. I had training on food stamp access or SNAP access. This is clearly not a giveaway. It's an enormous force multiplier. It's an enormous, using a military term, it's an enormous benefit to the community and frankly to the person who gets to participate in the service, because so many of us who serve in that way or in the military or in other ways, we learn that the world is bigger than us, and that we have a lot more in common than we think, and that we need to, kind of work together. And so if we could have, in my opinion, a nation full of people who have access to opportunities to serve, we would be a whole lot better off.
I remember in the old days, the neoliberals were advocating, right, a year of national service for every American, which I think would be terrific. By the way, I'm old enough to remember when the Reagan administration was cutting social programs and they were going to cut Head Start. Orrin Hatch from Utah stood up and said, "Over my dead body, are you cutting Head Start?" And it was a very different time.
Yeah.
Well,
we need that. We need those people, and I'm hoping those people will find their spines and their hearts and their brains and figure out what they need to be saying.
Well, you mentioned these conversations that you're having with your Republican colleagues, and I kind of imagine myself as a fly on the wall now in these conversations. You're kind of saying, "Well, have you had enough? Now are you convinced?" So one of the things that we've become known for here at Shrinking Trump is controversially diagnosing Trump early on and warning the public, feeling as professionals we had a duty to warn the public as to what the alarming implications of what we were observing as clinicians. We even know that John Kelly secretly bought our book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, right? It went to understand the person he was chief of staff for and felt that was the one book that actually explained Trump. I kind of wonder, and you don't have to reveal any confidences, so you can talk around this if you want to. But when you talk to your Republican colleagues or your Democratic colleagues, do people realize he's nuts? Do people realize that he has a severe personality disorder, that he's showing early signs of dementia? I mean, is that something that you guys talk about or recognize?
Interestingly enough, President Trump this weekend said, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not responsible for understanding the Constitution or adhering to the Constitution. Right. I would, to your point, I would say, you know what, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I can't diagnose what, certainly not remotely. I've actually only been in the same room with President Trump a couple times, and he's never spoken directly to me. So I can't assess, you know, what his issues are, other than he is destroying this country, and he is destroying our globe, and he is destroying every ally that we have and relationship that we have, and he's encouraging all of the antagonistic people who would like to see ill of us to create and behave poorly as well. So yeah, I mean, certainly there's a lot of like wink wink and nod going on, you know, between Dems and Republicans and Republicans and Republicans and that sort of thing. But in the end, you know, we have to be true to ourselves. And in the end, I would hope that people who are here, who are elected to serve, understand that we have a responsibility. My colleagues sometimes say, you know, I'm here to represent, you know, my community is really angry and my community is behind President Trump. And yes, you know, I'm here to represent too. But I'm also here to be a leader. And I also am here to come back from what are weeks and weeks in Washington, D.C. with dozens and hundreds of conversations with my colleagues and others and report back. And my job is also to lead and to say, like, what I saw was and what I heard was, and this is why maybe what we're getting is not complete information. And let me you know, challenge you with some different information. And so I am frustrated by my colleagues of all forms who choose to not necessarily be seeking of information and who choose to not necessarily be able to modify their opinion and lead.
Well, just to follow up on what John said, because, you know, psychologists tend to either have theoretical, conceptual ideas of someone like a diagnosis, but the other half is following behavior. And really, I think your answer is look at the behavior. It doesn't matter if you put a mental health spin on it. The behavior is dangerous. It's unpredictable, and it's a completely unforced error. And I've never been so alarmed.
Same.
Yeah.
That's why we're talking to each other.
That's why we're talking to each other.
I really hope that there's a world where I won't have to do this all the time, where we will be in a place where I believe in a healthy government with two parties, healthy parties. I believe that the legislative branch should be contemplative, and that Congress, you know, the House should probably be, the analogy that I heard that most resonates with me is we're the boiling teacup and they're the Senate is the saucer where things cool. Right. And we need that. And we need to get back to normalcy, whatever that is. And we also need to get back to treating each other with dignity and respect. And that I think is the most important thing.
Dignity and humility.
Yeah. And gentlemen, unfortunately, I have to go to my next opportunity, but it's been a pleasure to speak with you. And I admire your work. And obviously, we have a lot in common.
Well, thank you so much. And if there's anything we can do to help you, just let us know. Would you? We're going to be following you and supporting you any way we can.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you for your work. Keep up the good fight.
Well, John, what did you think of that interview?
She's a very impressive person, and I'm really glad that we have her in the Democratic leadership and a relatively new Congresswoman. I'm glad that we're able to bring a little bit of a spotlight to her. I think she really does understand what's happening and is trying to really point out the discrepancies. I think, though, as much as I feel like I'm now a fan, and I think if we ever do take the House again, which I think we might, that then I think she will have more levers of power to actually actualize these policies and investigations that she's talking about. I think one thing, though, that I found, and I understand why this is, she's actually from a purple district. It's actually a real blue flip, actually, because that district has been Republican for a long time, Chester County, Pennsylvania. There was also some redistricting, so it slightly changed the district. So I understand that like when the Democrats had their, bipartisan shindig, they had it in Chester County. I mean, if you remember that, we had all the Republicans talking as well as the Democrats that a lot of Democrats didn't like. But I feel like she's trying to get the Republicans to play by the rules. She's doing all the right things. Do you know what I mean? In terms of reaching out, and she's sort of saying, "Oh, I'm kind of hoping that eventually they'll get a spine and a brain and a heart." I think the problem is, I think that time has passed. I think that's the problem. Is that's the way legislation used to work when it worked. And it's just so broken now that I think these, and I'm not saying there aren't things that she can accomplish or hasn't accomplished, but I'm just saying what would be the appropriate behavior now, I think is kind of, I don't want to say it seems naive, because I think she should keep doing it, and she probably will get some results. I'm not trying, but in other words, this attempt to have some kind of bipartisan national security concern, right? Because that's really her space. That's what should be the one place, right, where we should be united, right? And she can't get them to do it.
I agree with you. I think though that I think it's clear to me from the interview that she is a person of deep moral character.
Yes,
very strong principles.
Yes.
And she is acting on those principles as forcefully as she can.
Yes.
And I think that if we do take back the House, which I think is actually quite likely after Trump tanks the economy in the next few months, that she'll use those connections and her track record to be a principled voice who may then have some power.
Right.
And that might make her more convincing than people who are seen as more kind of theatrical or bombastic. I think she'll be looked at as someone with real seriousness, what they used to call in the old days gravitas.
Yeah, she has it. Yeah,
I think she does too.
And she does her homework. She's prepared. Well, Harry, I guess we've gotten to the shrink wrap portion of the show. What did we learn this week?
Good question. I'm going to continue to talk about hope, because I'm starting to really believe that Trump's aggressive economic attacks on the world order, the world economic order, they're going to be terrible, and no one's going to convince him to stop. He may get scared and back off, at the last minute, because he tends to do that. But the damage he's going to do, I said this last week, but I think Liberation Day is going to be like mission accomplished on the aircraft carrier for George W. Bush. It's going to be like that. And we're starting to see it happen. It's only 110 days or so, but we're starting to see it happen. So again, be vigilant, be worried, because I'm very worried about what's going to happen to the working class people and the middle class people in this country when suddenly the jobs disappear, when the shipping disappears, when construction stops, when small businesses fail with all the shortfalls from China, or the 145% tariff. And China's looking at Trump and saying, "Oh yeah, we'll see you and raise you 5. Good luck."
That's right.
And he's looking nervous about it too. He said, "Well, we're starting talks with China." Well, this weekend they're going to talking about it.
Yeah.
It's not talks.
Right.
So I think that we have to put on our seatbelts. We have to fight against the incursions of democracy. But there's some hope that his destructive behavior is going to bring down his position in the country. And that gives us an opportunity to take back the House and take away his ability to do these things because he's doing it through emergency orders that the Republican Congress is supporting. If one of the house falls, if one of the two houses fall, it's done. He can't do the stuff anymore.
And I'm glad you kind of listed all of the economic devastation and the domino effect. But, I was looking at something on social media of this woman who'd won Entrepreneur of the Year in Minnesota or something like that. And she's saying, I've got a month's worth of inventory left in my factory, in my warehouse. And she goes, if there isn't anything coming from China, she goes, I'm out of business. That's it. It's over. I think you're right. One of the things that's really going to strike at the heart of the American people is we're going to watch thousands of small businesses fail. They're just going to fail. They don't have the deep pockets to survive not having inventory and just staying in business. It's not going to happen. So I think that is something, he really is ramming the economy into an iceberg. And we're going to see, I really believe Christmas is going to be the climax because people are so sentimental about Christmas. And the shelves are going to look like the Soviet Union. That's what I'm predicting.
But I think the high prices come the summer and the fall. There's going to be a lot of rage in America.
Yep. No, I think there is absolutely. It's going to start hitting in this financial quarter, because look, the ships are already landing empty. All right. So now we're going to start to see a whole new phase of what it's like to make yourself into a pariah nation and into an island. It's interesting. A lot of dictators have this idea or this fantasy of self-sufficiency. Mao had this idea too. He didn't want to import any steel. So he made every citizen responsible for smelting some steel, which I don't know how these peasants out in the rice paddies were supposed to make steel. He didn't explain. And as a result, they didn't tend to their farms, and that produced the famine that caused tens of millions of people to die. But there is something about these dictators. They want to be totally self-sufficient. It's a fantasy, right? We're in an interdependent world. We can't live without Canada's goods.
And there's Trump saying we don't need anyone else's goods. We'll make everything here. And it's really crazy. It's really irrational. It's not really based on rationality. But look at this. Here I am hoping that he crashes the economy such that he can be stopped from doing worse, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the working class and the middle class that's been suffering for 25 years is going to get shafted by it.
Yeah, they really are. There's so many people who are going to be hurt. So many people who are just hanging on. The people who are, the working class, the middle class. I mean, these are the people who, really depend on a few $100s a month, one way or another, can really make a big difference.
Paycheck to paycheck.
The mortgage. Yeah.
Paycheck to paycheck.
I think the other thing we learned this week, and, we joked about the whole Alcatraz thing, but, we weren't kidding, folks, when we said he had dementia. Okay. And we predicted that if we are correct, you will continue to see the signs of dementia because nobody gets better. Right? They only get worse. But now, because he's in a more kind of, as you say, relaxed environment where everybody's, fluffing him and smiling at him, and he can say any crazy thing he wants. They all just smile like this. One of the questions we had is, well, what would happen? People said, well, what if we had a president that actually had dementia? What would happen? Well, one of the things that's happening is everybody's just doing improv. In improv, you always say yes, right? So Harvard equals Harlem. Yeah. And, those people in Harlem, they really hate Harvard. They go with it, And so he's talking about Silence of the Lambs, or he's talking about, Alcatraz, I'll be in the movie business. I'll be a pope, but they don't really get me. And everyone's just kind of chuckling along with him and kind of so it'll actually be interesting, Harry, to see how nuts he can be, how deteriorated he can be, and how sycophantic people can be in actually acting like this is normal. The Emperor's New Clothes effect. I think we're entering into a phase of the Emperor's New Clothes, that no matter how nutty, right, he does, whether it's tweeting at himself as a picture of the Pope, or confusing a movie about Alcatraz with the actual Alcatraz because he just saw a movie about Alcatraz, that all of that is just being normalized. We just keep dumbing down And
Sure.
maybe, I don't know, is there a limit? Is there a limit? Is there? We'll find out.
There hasn't been one. You know, David Letterman used to say to his sidekick, "Play along," but everyone's just playing along, and it's a disaster in the making.
Yeah.
It is. Well, John, what a week it's been.
What a week.
What stood out for you the most?
You know, I was just thinking how crazy, how insane it is that Trump is having fantasies of being Pope. But, you know, it kind of got me thinking, what the hell? I mean, the world's upside down anyway. What kind of world would it be if Trump were actually Pope?
Well, Your Holiness, Mr. President, Your Holiness.
Yes.
My first question, how can you become Pope? You're not Catholic, are you?
Well, let me tell you something. I know more about Catholicism than all the Catholics because I've read 2 Corinthians, and all the people, they just keep coming up to me and saying, "Oh, sir, you're so holy. You're so holy. You should be Pope." And, you know, everyone's saying it. Everyone's talking about how holy I am and how I'm really a god. And so who am I to say no?
Mr. Holiness, how is your papal rule going to be different from your predecessor, Pope Francis?
Well, I just have to say that Francis was a loser. And, you know, I don't want to say, but the church is a dying institution. Okay, it's a failing institution. Okay, it's been totally taken over by brown people and black people. Okay, so it's you know, it right now it's for suckers and losers. And, you know, so, you know, he just ran the church into the ground, and everything bad about it is because of him. But you know what? I am the chosen one, and only I can fix it, because I'm going to put the anti back in Antichrist.
Well, Mr. Holiness,
Yes.
popes aren't allowed to be married. What about your relationship with Melania?
Let me tell you something, buddy. When you're a pope, they let you do it. But you know, I don't like your questions. I don't like your tone. In fact, I don't like you, your face, your ethnic group, or your stupid podcast. Drinking Club, a failing, money-losing venture. Gotcha there. For suckers and losers. In fact, I'm going to give Pam Bondi your name. But in the meantime, let me explain it to you, people. This is what you voted for with your white smoke. There's going to be a few changes in town now. I know I'm supposed to abide by this thing called the Bible, but, you know, I have to talk to some of my theologians about that first before I have to get back to you on that whole Bible thing. Because, you know, yeah, little shrinking Trump man, what is it you have to say?
Mr. President Holiness, Mr. President Holiness, do you have a blessing for the world?
See, now that's the kind of nice question you should be asking, little Trump man, little shrinking Trump man. Yes, exactly. Why can't you ask nice questions like that? Like, sir, do you have some holiness to share with us? And I do. We're rewriting the rules, folks. This is the MAGA Sermon on the Mount. I hope you're ready. Blessed are the rich, for theirs is the kingdom of mammon. Blessed are those who mourn, because I'll give you something to mourn about. Blessed are the predatory, for they shall inherit the earth, including Greenland and Canada. Blessed are those who thirst for power, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciless, because there's no mercy with the suckers and the losers and the Jews and the immigrants and the bad people who we can Photoshop anything we want on their knuckles and send them to El Salvador. Blessed are the black of heart, because they shall be gods in their own minds. And blessed are the deal makers, because we take advantage of the weaklings. Blessed are those who persecute the righteous, for ours is the kingdom. Blessed are those who persecute the righteous. Blessed are you when you revile, persecute, and lie about the righteous, because you will win the propaganda war on Fox News. I have not come to fulfill the law, but destroy it.
Thank you, Your Holiness.
You're welcome.
We'll be back next week, and John will be his old self. Have a good week. Hope to see you
Have
next
a good
week.
week.
Here on Shrinking Trump, at least for a while.